And next, the second presenter will be joining us online from Credit Agricole from Hong Kong. We have Executive Director Mark Teng. Mr. Mark Teng has been primarily responsible for covering the ship financing activities of Asian shipping companies with an emphasis on the Korean market. In his 20-plus years in the Korean market, he has structured and originated all kinds of Korean ship finance deals. ESG, green finance, and sustainable finance are key buzzwords in this industry, and he will be presenting the topic sustainable financing market for the shipping industry. You have the floor, Mr. Teng. Mr. Teng, you are on mute.
Thank you very much. That's how you know I'm not an AI, that I make a presentation mistake. So I hope you can all see my screen. So thank you, Moderator Song. Thank you to my fellow speakers, my fellow panelists, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to be here today, or rather virtually, at the 17th World Ocean Forum. I wish I could be with you, and thank you for inviting me. When I was first approached to speak on the subject of blue technomy, I thought the term was the perfect description of something that all shipping financiers have been grappling with over the last few years, namely the sustainable financing of the future ocean-going fleet. So naturally, Busan is the perfect place to be talking about this, with the proximity to innovation and scale of shipbuilding that you will find in no other place in the world. And I'm perfectly happy to follow Per Brandt of ING, who is a good friend and partner, who have laid down an outline of what it's like to be a shipping financier today, thinking about the various costs of capital and the capacity restrictions. And today I'd like to focus a little more on the ESG side, on the sustainable finance in shipping. So first to start off, if you can, okay, so Credit Agricole, just very quickly, has been my professional home for the last 23 years. We have one of the longest continuous presence of shipping, not just in Asia, but all over the world. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that with 1,400 ships in our portfolio and 65 professionals covering about 200 clients over the entire world, we're clearly a committed and concerned member of shipping's decarbonization efforts. With all the experts in the room and limited time, I would try to focus on three things today. The first one will be the decarbonization hurdles faced by the industry. The funding gap is the second thing I will talk about that Herbrand had touched upon just a little earlier. And the third thing is, of course, the solutions that's being explored by both owners and banks to meet both challenges. So let's get right into it. Even though shipping is already the most carbon efficient mode of transportation in the world, given the giant size and scale of the ships, we still have to do our part to reduce our carbon footprint, which today stands at about 3% of the global emissions. You can say that's small, but that's also, if you think about it, the same amount as a country like Germany. So we must all do our part. And despite being what is called a hard to abate industry, meaning that people have recognized that it's a difficult industry to decarbonize, the revised strategy of the IMO since last July lays out an even more ambitious pathway for us to decarbonize the sector. And I guess the more we wait, the more difficult that pathway will become. So the goal, of course, is to get to net zero by 2050, as everyone must have all heard. But there are now also very stringent sub-criteria in 2030 and 2040. So as one of the founding members of the Poseidon Principles, Credit Agricole is also fully supportive of this IMO vision. But all this requires funding. So before we start talking about the scale of the funding gap, let's just take a look at where we are today. Where shipping financing is still mainly done by banks, ECAs, and more and more so today, leasing companies. So apologies for the small font, and to save you some squinting, I would just say here that the top 40 banks in shipping today contribute to a total loan portfolio of 280 billion US dollars. Now that sounds like a lot, but it's actually 100 billion less than what it was in 2008. The market is going through a profound change as more and more banks sign up for global decarbonization initiatives, not just in shipping, but in all sectors. Most, if not to say all, leading shipping banks are signatories of the Poseidon Principle and or the Net Zero Banking Alliance. The former is a 30-bank contingent representing about $200 billion of shipping finance. The latter is a wider group composing of 134 banks. So these two major initiatives, I tend to think of them as like a compass or a watch or just a timer, right? Much like on a ship, these are indispensable tools that will direct the support we provide to our shipping clients in their decarbonization efforts. If we redraw the earlier chart of banks and we just paint ourselves with the color of our money, so to speak, you'll clearly see that nearly all of the top shipping banks in the world are signatories of either the Poseidon Principles, which you see here in green, or the NZBA. 2 out of the 9 here, the blue ones are in fact NZBA signatories as well. The remainder are mainly state policy banks, leasing companies or ECAs, and all of them we know very well, and all of them have their own decarbonization guidelines and initiatives as well. Now, given this, so I think it's quite interesting that when owners come to us and they tell us that, oh, where's the next dollar of our shipping finance will come from, given all this change in the market. What they don't know is banks are also, things are keeping us awake at night. Where do we put the next dollar of shipping finance? Because we are also looking at many guidelines and policies that will guide us, as I mentioned earlier. So this alignment, we believe, will be crucial because now we get to the funding gap. There may not be enough money to go around. With our current decarbonization projections and the required capital expenditure to meet IMO targets, that's what you see in the blue bars, we estimate there will be approximately about 110 billion to 150 billion, going up to over 200 billion dollars a year of required capex. And this is not even taking into account the fuel supply, the onshore infrastructure. We're just talking about ships. And conventional bank financing, including today banks and leasing companies, that's also expected to grow. That's what you see in the green bar, but it's a slower pace. So we expect a funding gap between 20 to 90 billion dollars a year with not just ships, but also some auxiliary assets. And this will grow. This gap will grow to $90 billion by 2050 if current technological expectations are upheld. Right? So now we've outlined the problem. Let's talk a little bit about solutions. And I'll go through this a bit quickly, given the time constraint. So firstly, for the owners, obviously, they've all clearly realized the future is in the decarbonization of the shipping fleet. And in recent years, we've seen a dramatic change in the new building order book to accommodate for this. For the first time ever, very interestingly, today we are seeing alternative fuel capable new building orders outnumbering the conventional fuel ships in the order book. And we have plenty of reason to believe that there will be more to come, as green or even transition fuel will substantially reduce shipping's emissions in the medium to long term. So these are obvious choices. These are low-hanging fruits today that's attracting a lot of first movers in the shipping sector. And now if we zoom in on that 51 number you see on the right of the alternative fuel-capable ships, we'll see something that's even more interesting. So if you look at the pie chart, it's a zoomed-in version of that gray 51% slice earlier. You'll see that 40 out of that 51 is LNG, what we call a transition fuel. another 8% in methanol, and 3% in LPG and battery. So that's very small, and we say, oh, maybe we expect battery to grow a bit more, but that's really for today coastal or short ocean-going vessels. With 80% of emissions emitted by long voyage ocean-going vessels, what's clearly missing in this pie chart is ammonia, which is the next big thing. It is what the IEA, the International Energy Agency, say will be the most popular alternative fuel by 2030. So with that, with the advent and ascendancy of ammonia, we expect this chart to change significantly, even in the next 2-3 years. But other than the obvious solution, which is fuel that we talked about, there are also other things that owners and charterers are using to improve their fleet's carbon efficiency or carbon intensity numbers. For instance, for smaller conventional ships, there isn't much they can do in terms of building new alternative fuel ships because of scale, because of technological or space concerns, right? Where we think alternative fuel capability is not the answer, retrofitting is something that are on the owner's minds. And I love this picture because when I was a kid, I had a lot of Lego ships, and it's a funny exercise here to imagine all the retrofitting equipment that are available today on one ship. You have sails, you have lubrication systems, you have the green propulsion, the advanced rudders, propellers, right? So part of me thinks this is really cool, but this would also be completely unbankable. Because how can a banker, looking at this, take a mortgage on all of these little things? How do we get security over that? It would be so much easier, given the constraints we face, to put the finance dollars into a shiny new ammonia-powered new building ship, and we call it a day. So how do we, again, about the alignment, how do we encourage owners to do this? How do we find the financing for it in order to achieve substantial and meaningful decarbonization by 2030? Because let's face it, the new buildings are not coming fast enough. This is absolutely needed, this kind of retrofitting, if we were to reach the intermediate targets. And assessing the new economic life of these vessels after such expensive retrofitting is really hard. How do we evaluate the so-called abatement costs, above which is just too expensive or too risky? What about spot trading ships? Right? Will they be able to earn enough to amortize the extra costs before the end of life? And what we think here is a clear solution that we think would be for more policy banks and ECAs to step up for retrofitting to be done and assist banks in attracting capital, perhaps with partial loan guarantees or other products that we already do together today for new building ships. We think this would be very helpful, again, in attracting capital from the markets, and definitely within the policy guidelines to support the domestic economies. Retrofits are by definition very work intensive, and they should be a good business for today for a lot of mid-sized or regional shipyards. Now, lastly, on the subject of decarbonization costs, right, we see also that despite what you see in the order book, which is long and busy, many sectors remain underbuilt. I think some are meant to be on a downward trend. I don't think anyone will be surprised to see that in 3 years there will be more LNG ships than VLCCs. But other ones on the right, in the dry bulk market or the product tanker sector, they have a lot to catch up in terms of fleet replacement. And owners may just have no choice but to build conventional ships, albeit with the latest eco designs to satisfy the cargo demand. Okay, so all these new assets, the alternative fuel ships, the conventional ships, the retrofits, they all explain the demand side of the funding gap I've talked about. Money is needed. But on the bank or funding side, right, we are also trying our best to ensure that existing budgets are allocated to the right projects, and also looking for new sources of funding to close that gap. And what you hear most today is the term sustainable finance. And I hear the quick message is that, first of all, it's nothing new. For Crédit Agricole, we're the first French bank to sign the Equator Principles back in 2003. In 2010, we established our sustainable banking team. And last year, we were the top sustainable arranger in the world. What does that mean? Well, for shipping, unfortunately, not much yet. Again, shipping is a hard-to-abate sector. There are less visible technological solutions than, say, a battery-powered car. So we believe shipping has yet to take full advantage of the sustainable finance market. As the technological gap shrinks, this will get better. Now, today, there are two kinds of sustainable financing instruments, namely use of proceeds or sustainability linked. And the main difference is just how the borrower uses that money. Use of proceeds is more specific. They finance assets with real decarbonization value, such as zero carbon emission engines. They must have a clear environmental benefit. Right? On the other hand, for sustainability linked loans, they incentivize the borrower to perform, to meet performance targets at a company level. So they're a bit more flexible. If we just focus on use of proceeds for a second, as we talked about, there are real technological advancements in fuel type and retrofitting that's being adopted today. And they undoubtedly will increase in the next 10 years. They will certainly be considered a green use of proceeds. Alternative fuel capable ships, those dedicated to renewable energy infrastructure, such as wind farms, they would also qualify. So there are more and more assets that will be qualified in the near future. On the other hand, companies with hard-to-abate assets can still take advantage of sustainability-linked loans or bonds by carefully constructing, then meeting, and hopefully exceeding those sustainability performance targets. And on this, I would just say, I really cannot overemphasize the importance of a dialogue between borrowers and banks. As a banker, we never presume to know more about the industry than our clients. And we're always happy and humbled to share, when our clients share with us, rather, creative ways to think about real decarbonization and change. On a case-by-case basis, because we're always mindful of greenwashing or not being realistic or not in line with the IMO pathway. So putting the two together, we see that sustainability financing is more popular today. It's more flexible. But however, new technology and stricter rules, right? I think these will push owners towards specific assets as the technology makes it available. And it would also incentivize capital markets, the policy banks, the ECAs, all of us on the funding side, to reward those companies with cheaper financing terms. And so to bring the presentation to an end on a note of optimism, if we take a step back, just shipping, I'm happy to say that overall sustainability finance instruments have grown exponentially, I think over 10 times in the last 5 years. What I find most interesting here is that little bit of green loans that seems underrepresented in the overall stack, which may be the bottleneck in the overall picture, and suggesting more potential to continue that exponential growth once we overcome the technological bottleneck. So that brings me to the end of my presentation today. We've talked a little about shipping's decarbonization hurdles, the envisaged future funding gaps due to the significant capital expenditure, and what banks are doing and what owners are doing to work to align ourselves to meet this great challenge. It's something that we must all do to meet the ambitious pathway as set out by the IMO. So thank you again for your invitation, and I hope my presentation and the upcoming panel will spur many more interesting discussions for all of you in the audience today. Have a great day ahead.
Mr. Mark Teng, thank you for the presentation. CapEx funding gap.
So the capex funding gap would be about 20 to 90 billion per year, and that presents a huge challenge for us. So we heard about the background of sustainable finance structure, the size of the market, and the trend. Thank you, and please give another big hand to our speaker.
그래서 마지막 발표자입니다.